Please tell me your full name and where and when you were born.
Full name is Jeramie Stack, and I was born in Orlando, Florida.
Do you have any family members that are serving or have served in the military?
I do have family members who have served in the military. Both of my parents served. My grandfather was a Marine. Several cousins, aunts, uncles.
What were you doing before you entered the service?
I was in high school.
What motivated you to join the military?
Well, I didn't really have the money to pay for school. I didn't have the grades for a scholarship, and I knew I didn't want to depend on my parents anymore after I graduated. So, given the history that my family had with the military, I thought it would be a good option for me.
In which branch of the military did you serve?
Army.
Why did you choose that specific branch?
My mom had gone Army, my dad had gone Army, and at the time I kind of thought, well, one branch is as good as the other. So,
What happened when you departed for boot camp and during early days of training?
there is a bit of a culture shock when you first get off the bus, kind of what you see in a lot of videos where people are yelling at you and, get off the bus and you're dumping your stuff all out of your bags and, rushing to get all of your new equipment. So it can be a bit chaotic. But after that initial, shock and you are in the barracks with, your bunkmates and you start to get to know each other, that was interesting because you get people from all over the country, sometimes even other countries, that can share their experiences and their ideas with you. And you really learn a lot just from interacting with a lot of your battle buddies.
Do you have any memories of your instructors that you would like to share?
A few. There was one, and for the life of me, I can't remember his name, so you'll have to forgive me, but he took one look at me and said that I wasn't going to make it. I was pretty small when I got out of high school. I was probably 115 pounds soaking wet, 5 foot tall, and didn't think I would make it, I guess. So I walked up to him at graduation and told him, hey, I made it. I had another one that told me to take my boots and put them back on the bear that I stole them from in the PX because I had really small feet. And they liked to pick on me about that a lot. All the drill sergeants did. There was at one point, the first day of AIT, I went to Chow, and my drill sergeant at that time called me over. It was a group of them sitting together, and he said, come over here, Stack. And I thought, oh God, what did I do now? Did I did I grab the wrong cup or something? Because there's, they'll pick on you about anything. And all he did was point at my feet, and they all just started laughing. And so I just kind of stood there with my tray until he told me to leave, and then I could go sit down and eat. But yeah, my feet were always a big joke for them. They loved it. I think the one that sticks out the most, though, is Drill Sergeant Wiley. We were out in the field on 9/11, and one of the females that was in my unit had family that worked at the Trade Center, and he let her use his personal cell phone to call home while we were out in the field. So he sticks out the most.
Did you receive any specialized training?
I was a heavy wheel vehicle mechanic, so that was probably the most specialized I got was when I went to AIT. I was interested in going for further training, but all that has to kind of be approved by like your or platoon sergeants. For me, it was a motor sergeant. And, we were always really busy when I got to my unit, so I oftentimes got overlooked for additional trainings.
Could you tell me about the barracks and the food and the physical regimen?
So I actually really enjoyed the structure when I was in training. It was, you knew exactly what you were doing at every second of the day. You get up, you do PT, you go to lunch, or you go to chow for breakfast, you go to work, go to chow for lunch, you go back to work, then you have end of day formation. And then you go back to the barracks if you're not, living on your own, like with a family or something, which I was young, I was single, I lived in the barracks. I didn't mind it. It was kind of nice just having my own little space. Roommates can be a hassle, depending on which ones you get. I've had good roommates and I've had some really horrible roommates. One that actually tried to kick a chair into my head once. So it's one of those things you have to kind of tread lightly at times. But, overall, it's not a bad experience. I don't know about other barracks, but we had our own bathroom. So it was 2 people to a room, a private bathroom, and then you had a common area where there was a small kitchen and a TV that you could go and watch television on if you didn't have one in your room. So, food, I always liked the DVAC. I'm a bit of a chow hound. In fact, one of my drill sergeants in AIT told me that I would be fat when I grow up because I ate too much. So, wasn't wrong. I do eat too much. Always have. I love food, and the chow hall was always open, so I always thought the food was pretty good.
Where did you serve?
After training in Fort Jackson, I went to South Korea. I was at Camp Humphreys at first, but only for about a month. And then I was transitioned over to Seoul. So I was in the capital, actually, for about 18 months.
Do you remember arriving in Seoul and what it was like?
I do. I got there the day after Christmas in 2001, I think it was. Yeah, 2001. And it was very cold. I grew up in Florida. So after spending some time at home, after training, I left Florida in a pair of blue jeans and a t-shirt and got to Korea where it was below 0 and had only one small jacket to put on. It was a priority to go buy new clothes like the second day I was there. So,
What were your duties?
I worked in the motor pool. When I first got there, they had me working in the tool shed. So any specialized tools that, you wouldn't just have in your toolbox were kept under lock and key. And they always had a clerk working in there. So they did that for about 6 months until I finally made enough noise and told them I don't want to be in there. I was trained to be a mechanic. I want to work on the vehicles. So after that, they started pairing me up with some of the more experienced mechanics to do certain repairs, parts replacements, things like that, troubleshooting, making sure that the vehicles and generators are all up to date on their inspections, and same thing that you would expect to find in a garage with mechanic, but it's all diesel. So
Would you tell me about a couple of your most memorable experiences?
there's quite a few. I'd have to say the most memorable was probably 9/11. We were at the very end of basic training. We were out in the field. We were doing our ex evals. So when it was announced to us what happened, our first sergeant had called everyone to formation and told us what happened. There was no way for us to call home to confirm this or see what was going on. We didn't have, TVs. This is before the day of, smartphones. Nobody, and even if you had one, you weren't allowed to have it. So, there was actually a lot of people who thought it was a hoax. They thought that they were telling us what happened as a way of, inciting some kind of adrenaline. They thought, oh, it's just part of the training. And I knew it was real, like I said, because of what Drill Sergeant Wiley had done. I told him, I said, if this was a hoax, I really don't think that they would let them use his personal cell phone to call home. And then a few days later, when we marched back to the garrison, the headline on the newspaper was, "We're at war." Normally, we're not allowed to buy the newspapers, but several of us asked, and the drill sergeants agreed that we could buy them and immediately put them in our personal effects that were locked away. So I guess they realized, the significance of what was going on and allowed us, that compensation essentially. After calling home, my family was really worried that I was going to be immediately deployed after training, but I had already had my duty assignment for South Korea. So I knew exactly where I was going after training, which, so I had to reassure my family, like, no, I'm not going to be sent to war immediately. That's, I already have a duty station and that's where I'm going to be going. I did eventually deploy when I came back to the States. So that's probably the most memorable experience that I had. When I signed up, it was technically a time of peace, and within the course of a few weeks, it changed very dramatically.
How did you stay in touch with family and friends back home?
Mostly letters, especially during training. I think I wrote home pretty much every day, any free time that we got. If I had any kind of guard duty, a lot of times I would sit down and write a letter. During training, we got once a week where we could use the payphones to call home. And then when I was in Korea, I used to get phone cards. I know a lot of people probably don't even know what that is nowadays, but yeah, phone cards was a big thing, kind of like a regular investment every week when I was in South Korea so that I could call home and keep in touch with family. And then when I was deployed in Iraq, that was more difficult. Occasionally we would find a fob somewhere that had an MWR tent where you could get the phone cards and call home. Or they would have a satellite phone, but these were always very limited. You probably only got 10 or 15 minutes to be on the phone, tell them, hey, I'm alive, miss you, love you, and then, you had to go. So.
Would you tell me about the day your service ended?
I don't remember very much about the exact day. I got out in 2004. My husband at that time was actually currently deployed, and we were living in Texas, Fort Hood, Texas. So because I didn't really feel like being alone, I decided I would go home to Florida for an extended vacation. And a week after I got there, Hurricane Charlie hit. So I spent 2 months essentially helping my family pick up after the hurricanes that year. But it was still nice to be home and to be able to at least be there with them when they went through that. Because it is different, if you're not with them, then it's like, oh, what's going on? What's happening? You can see what's going on the news. But all the cell towers were broken and down. So there was no cell service. There was no landlines. There was no power. And for my family, because they were on well water, there was no water because there was no power. So it was kind of roughing it. My extended vacation.
How did you return home?
So after training, I went home for about a month. I did 2 weeks of leave and 2 weeks of hometown recruiting. And I flew each way. There were a few times that I had flown home for leave. And then after I got out, I flew. So occasionally, and this was probably after I got out, but since I was living in Texas, I would actually drive from Texas to Florida and then back again. So that was a long drive.
How did you readjust to excuse me, how did you readjust to civilian life?
I didn't actually, to be honest. When I got out, I was at that time married to a soldier. So it was still very much the same lifestyle that I'd always lived. The only difference is that instead of ironing 2 uniforms in the morning, I only ironed 1. So it's just kind of the lifestyle that you live for a long time. I think I probably didn't transition to civilian life until maybe after I moved back to Florida, after I got divorced. And that was interesting, reconnecting with people that I went to high school with and seeing how differently we had lived for so many years and some of the habits that you still have from being a soldier versus being a civilian.
What did you do after your military service?
I was a stay-at-home mom for a lot of years. So after I got out, one of the reasons I got out was because at that time, like I said, I was married to a soldier, and it was always one coming and the other going. And we wanted to have a family. So when my ETS date came up and I wasn't stop lost, I decided that I would be the one to get out. And very shortly after he had gotten back from the last second deployment, I got pregnant with our son. And I went to school for a while, and but after I gave birth to my son, I was a stay-at-home mom for quite a while until I was divorced. After I divorced, I moved back to Florida. I went to school, cashiered for a grocery store for quite a while, and for the last 6 years, I've actually been working customer service for government contractors.
How did your military experiences affect your life?
I mean, it affects it in a lot of different ways. Just the training that you get in general. A lot of those things stick with you your whole life. A lot of that structure. It really kind of becomes habit, certain things. But aside from that, the experiences that you have outside of training, when you are deployed, that's something that never leaves. Sorry. I think, not speaking for everybody, but I know for me and a lot of other soldiers that I know, there's a part of you that just never comes back. It's something that changes you almost to a cellular level. It's hard to explain unless you've lived through it. It's something that you don't really even want to explain to somebody who hasn't lived through it. But if you have lived through it, then you know. And it is something that I think a lot of veterans really connect on, that experience and that shared knowledge of what happens to you as a person when you live in a situation where you know that every day you're there, there's somebody out there actively trying to kill you. sorry. Every day you're there, there's a chance you won't come back. That never leaves you. Sorry. So yeah, it definitely sticks with you, even if you don't deploy. I've lived both ends of that, where you're the one that's deployed or you're the one that's at home waiting and wondering. Even that can be pretty difficult, because you just never know. You don't know. You don't know what's going on. And even when they call, they can't really share any information. You can't tell them where you are. You can't really tell them what's going on. You could just say, hey, I'm alive. Love you, miss you. Bye. So it's difficult no matter what end you're on.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view this interview?
That's a difficult one. It's worth it. If you have the gumption and the ambition to go do it, do it. Don't be afraid to enlist. Don't think that it's all doom and gloom. There's a lot of camaraderie, a lot of friends that you make that, you'll always be friends. You can go years without speaking to each other, but if you call them, you just pick up right where you left off. The experience of, learning what you do in the military can help you in civilian life, not just from an employment standpoint, but, from all walks of life. So don't be afraid. And it's always an honor to serve, no matter what your reasoning is, whether it's because you want to serve your country or you need money for college or you just need to get out of a bad situation. Military is not a bad option. But, do your research on which branch you want to go into. I will say that.
Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
Not that I can think of, really. It's just, it's a lifestyle. It's not a job. So that is something that I think maybe that goes along with the message to the future generations. Don't think that you're going to go in and it's going to be like a regular 9-to-5 job. Don't believe what your recruiter tells you. It's not true, because it is a lifestyle. You live that life for however long. You live it. And then when you get out, you still live it in your head and in the things that you do every day that some people will look at and think, why are you doing that? It's because that's just the lifestyle you live. And